Shaking off that Thanksgiving fog, we are on to the Week 13 main slate here with the Block Party DFS show. We got Jmtowin from 1 week season in the hopper. We are prepared to walk through this slate. We'll do an overview. We'll go position by position, and then we'll wrap up with a lineup build on DraftKings. I'm Pete. This is the Block Party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, 35 bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right, Jmtowin. Yeah, we gotta talk about the elephant in the room, the single breast in the room. What's going on with this painting over your head?
I mean, it's life, Pete. Nursing mothers, yeah, we got if you're listening to this instead of watching, I feel bad for you. But yeah, I'm in my mother and father-in-law's room. Obviously, she's the decorator. So we've got the nursing mother painting behind us. I did take it down for the Angles podcast because I wanted to save it for this show. I was going to choose a different background, and then I was like, what's better than this? So yeah, we're excited to run this show today and talk football, but also start out with some nursing mothers' breasts.
Yeah, I also like how your head in your hair is positioned just to obscure it. So like if you ever really want to toss the audience a bone, or you're like, hey, you just give the slide and then they can see the good stuff.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. We'll be here all day.
How was your Thanksgiving other than, hanging out in rooms with vaguely pornographic Renaissance imagery?
I actually didn't play the Thanksgiving slate. And every year I write up content being like, I always think I'm not going to play because it's such a busy week, right? Because it's a busy week with content. It's a busy week with work because we have a bunch of sales. By the way, we have a bunch of sales this week. Just go to the site. You can get Inner Circle rest of the year plus playoffs for $49, Bink Machine for $39. We have a bunch of sales this week. We have like calls and strategy and communication. And then you got 2 slates that everybody's interested in, plus travel, plus family. And then I'm always like, I might not play this week. And then I get to Wednesday night. And I'm like, of course I'm going to play. So Wednesday night I was working on rosters. I put in like a good 2 hours, and I was just like, I can't find anything I like. I'm going to end up building like 30 rosters just to do stuff. And then my thesis on that 3-game slate is that like over time, if you just tell a different story than the field is telling, you're going to make money over time. And then yesterday, like all the chalk hit. So yeah, unfortunate that I didn't, because I kept looking at Caleb Williams and Cole, and not Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, Rico Dowdle, but then I was like, oh man, these guys are so popular. I took down the Game Changer in 2020, just like being like, what is everybody doing? All right, let me tell the opposite story of that, right? And I think that's sharpest on that slate. But yeah, it was a fun day. Didn't have to sweat any games in some bad football games on TV. But what about you?
It was disappointing because I was having a really good day on Underdog in their big rake-free tournament. I had a team that was top 5 most of the day, and then that Jonnu drive at the end put him ahead of Laporta as the optimal, because I took a pretty big stand on Laporta over Jonnu, which was looking good. Those 2 TDs that Jonnu got there, and all my winnings just completely vanished.
I feel like I've when like a band becomes really popular and people are like, oh, they're not good anymore, they're too popular. I was there when nobody knew about them. It's like we were on Jonnu last year. Nobody would follow me on the Ritter, Jonnu, and Drake London stack last year, but he switched over to Kyle Pitts. We were on Jonnu the first 2 times he hit this year, and then last week I was like, I don't think Jonnu hits again this week, but I better add him in the player. I mean, I made it clear. I was like, I'm adding him in the player grid just because I don't want to miss now when he hits.
Yeah.
And now again this week, it's a weird Jonnu. He's a great player, right? Patriots never figured out how to use him. Falcons kind of had him as their number 2, but he's not this good of a player. So yeah, it's pretty wild.
I know the career arc for Jonnu, and we won't get too sidetracked here, but yeah, the Falcons, the Patriots, even on Tennessee, like he was such an exciting guy back on those early Tennessee teams. Let's talk a little bit about this slate. I'm pretty sure we kind of have a similar conversation last year on this week 13 or post Thanksgiving show about how it is a unique slate in that you just don't have the content and the level of attention to it that we do a typical slate, where that stuff starts Monday, Tuesday leading up. Like everyone is waking up this morning and starting to scramble of like, okay, let me set my sights on this. So what are some maybe macro thoughts you have on what that means for our play this week?
Yeah, even when I got the email for the link, you'd said I've had to scramble. I forgot to ask for a thumbnail on the video. I hope AJ Brown's okay. It's like, yeah, that's kind of the vibe of this week, right? It's like everybody's focused on the Thanksgiving slate, plus travel, plus family. We had kids to the mix, and that's a whole other element. And then people kind of turn the page to today, and it's like, oh, we got to start thinking about this slate. So for me, yeah, I had to write up all these games on Wednesday in order to not be working all day yesterday, and then had to wake up today and like reread all of my DFS interpretations. Like, what's this slate again? And so, I think that the big thing is there's an edge on this slate over time, right? If over time you put in your normal Friday, Saturday, and really it's the focus on Saturday night or Sunday morning when you're building rosters. If you put in your normal intention and focus during those times, you're going to come out ahead of the field over time, because the field is, because then we've got Black Friday today, and we've got, probably a lot of people treat Thanksgiving as a drinking holiday. So you got people hungover today, people shopping today, people doing all this stuff. And then it's like, oh yeah, I wanted to put in a DFS roster this weekend. So I think there's just generally speaking, there's edge if you treat it like a normal DFS weekend. And if you treat it like not, then you are the edge for other people, I guess.
That is well said there. Why don't we dive in though with a slate overview? I'll get the matchups pulled up here via 1 week season. Always helps us get our bearings here. What kind of stood out to you on this slate as far as game environments, team totals, anything catching your eye?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's 5 teams that are implied to score 25 or more, and these are not unexpected teams, which means that the pricing also matches those implied team totals, which means that if the Patriots or the Colts score 27 points at those price tags, that's tremendous. If the Bengals score 25, 26 at their price tags, it's not. Ravens, Eagles, like these teams that are implied to score 25 plus, 25 to 27 is this box of range, or it's the Rams, the Ravens, I guess we can see it on here, but the Rams, the Ravens, the Bucs, the Commanders, and one other that I'm overlooking, Bengals. If these teams hit those implied totals, like the price tags outside the Bucs, the price tags, like that doesn't win you a tournament, right? So you actually these have to be signals that say this team can score 34, this team can score 37, right? And so then the question becomes, do the Bengals score 37 against Pittsburgh, right? Do the Ravens and Eagles actually shoot out, or does it kind of play to this 27-24 type of game? Do the Commanders finally give us some tournament winners? And so, yeah, this is a weird week where it's like we've only got 5 games in this 25 plus point range. Everything else is 24.25 and below. And then these teams are priced as teams that typically score that type of that level of points. So they need to really score above that level of points. And none of them are, even the Rams and Saints one. It's very interesting, right? The Saints, since Darren Rizzi took over as head coach, they've allowed 17 to the Falcons, 14 to the Browns, a Browns team that's beat the Ravens and Steelers in this same stretch. And they're still, top 5, top 6 red zone defense. The Rams are 25th in red zone offense. The Saints have also allowed only 10 passing touchdowns all year, 12 rushing touchdowns. But then the Rams, like, they pick up their yardage points through Puka and Kupp. And so it's like Kyren Williams, you really want, for the Rams, you want a spot where they're forced to score touchdowns through the air, not through the ground, right? Because like Kyren kind of needs 3 touchdowns right now to be a tournament winner with his yardage production, right? And so yardage and receptions production. So yeah, all of these are kind of interesting spots where it brings in a higher likelihood of a low scoring weekend across the board, but it also brings in some of these games that have broad ranges of outcomes, but if they play to the upside, become really interesting. So Colts and Patriots being one of those games, and really Bucs and Panthers being a super interesting game that I want to talk about throughout this show. And then Texans and Jags, where looks like the team total on the Texans is starting to creep up a little bit, but Texans and Jags, one with kind of low team totals on this one, but those are the 3 really interesting games. Obviously Eagles and Ravens is super interesting. The Bengals are interesting because if they break through for 34, like Russell Wilson, Arthur Smith, they're always going to be close in the fourth quarter. So if the Bengals score 34, the Steelers are going to score 31 or maybe even 37. The question is, can the Bengals actually score that many points against the Steelers? And so, yeah, there's a lot to choose from this week and nothing that's really super high confidence this week.
Yeah, looking at these two, there's some fun ones. I guess one matchup I would ask you about that you didn't mention specifically that looked like kind of like the weirdest, just kind of juxtaposition of teams to me is Chargers Falcons, super tight spread, pretty good team totals here. Obviously, the Chargers without J.K. Dobbins now, Falcons coming off the bye, right? So, how did you have any interest for that one?
Yeah, I don't have interest on the Atlanta side because it's just so hard to put up big fantasy scores against the Chargers. And another one where the Chargers are just not going to give up long touchdowns, and the Falcons don't really score long touchdowns. And then the Falcons have been bad in the red zone this year, and the Chargers have been, one of the best red zone defenses in the NFL. And so that pulls things to the downside, right? But we have seen the Chargers 5 out of 7 games that Herbert's thrown 32 plus passes. You alluded to this last week. Like my preseason prediction on Herbert was right. It just took a while for it to play out. 4 of his last 5 games had 279 plus passing yards. And so this is definitely a spot where we've seen the Chargers get proactively aggressive, where it's like, hey, this team can score points against us. Let's also pass the ball and kind of be a little bit aggressive on offense. So I would expect that from the Chargers this week. The issue there is, like, can Herbert put up a really nice score at 5,600? Absolutely. He probably does. But it's like, we do want the quarterback who gets us 2 or 3 spots on our roster correct. It's like Lad McConkey has 1 game all season, over 7 targets. Quentin Johnston is broad range of outcomes and doesn't match up well with this Falcons defense that tries to keep everything underneath. And so it's like you get Herbert right, but do you get anything else right? And so, yeah, that's another interesting one where, we can kind of go through all these games. It's like there's some, not all of them, not Seahawks and Jets. I'm crossing Cards and Vikings off my list because these are both barbell teams. And I want to kind of say, like last week, I said barbell team with the Cardinals. Let me bet on it playing to the upside. This week, I'm going to say let me bet on it playing to the downside. So that's not one that I would instruct other people to cross off their list. It's just that's how I'm going to attack that one. But there's kind of all these games you could find something like Will Levis could be really interesting against Washington this week at 5K. Colts and Patriots could be really interesting. Herbert could be really interesting. Steelers and Bengals could be really interesting. Really like the Texans and Jags. So yeah, it's like all these games we can find things to like in terms of the quarterbacks, in terms of stacking up these games. And so I really think this is a week where you say, you can either look at ownership projections and say, what are people not on? Then I can go different from the field. Or you could say, like, what are the swings that I want to take? And so, it's an interesting week that way.
Yeah, let's segue over into looking at the quarterbacks. Obviously, we've kind of hit on some of these, but I think we got to start at the top. It doesn't look like the field is necessarily going to gravitate to paying up at quarterback this week, but thoughts on our 3 guys here at the high end. Obviously, the Konami code guys with the rushing, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Jaden Daniels. Any of these guys separate for you?
Yeah, Jaden Daniels is in a different category for me because just that offense hasn't. It's not like you've played Jaden Daniels and stacked him with somebody and won tournaments this year. But Hurts and Lamar, this is like a game of the season, right? Like Ravens are this team that when they're on, they are the best team in the NFL. They kind of have a lot of self-inflicted errors. They're not consistent week to week. And then the Eagles very clearly right behind the Lions as the best team in the NFC and far ahead of all the other teams. So a potential Super Bowl preview, 2 really good teams. And in these games, you almost never see the teams say, oh, let's be conservative, right? In these games where it's 2 really good teams, 2 really good offenses, each team tends to be aggressive in their tendencies. The issues here, Eagles defense has been really, really good lately as they've gotten used to this Vic Fangio scheme. He's figured out how to unlock this front 4. So they're getting pressure with their front 4. Then they've got this great young secondary that's playing really well. They're able to have extra bodies back there. And then they're really great against the run, right? And the Ravens like to build everything off the run. And then obviously the Ravens are great against the run. The Eagles like to build everything off the run. Hurts has had 25 or fewer pass attempts in 6 out of 7 games. The one game where he didn't, it was 28 pass attempts. And so, we're kind of looking at this. To me, I see it as you stack this game or you don't play it at all, right? Like Zay Flowers probably isn't hitting as a one-off without this game environment taking off. A.J. Brown hasn't seen double-digit targets since Kellen Moore kind of adapted to Jalen Hurts' style over the bye week, right? They came back from the week 4 bye, the week 5 bye, and Jalen Hurts since then, right? 1 game over 25 pass attempts. A.J. Brown's best targets game has been 9 targets. So at 8,300, does he go for you? 26 points, you're not going to complain, but you don't want to play him hoping for 26. You want to play him hoping for 32, 35, 40 at that price tag. He gets there if he gets 12, 13 targets in this matchup. And so to me, it's like if he's getting there, this whole game environment is developing in such a way that other players from this game are getting there. So I really like this game as one to stack, but it's not one that I'm going to go out of my way to play otherwise. So yeah, I like Hurts, I like Lamar, and I like the players around them if they're doing really well. And I think that's the way to treat this game.
Yeah, and like you said too, with the salaries, you're going to need that game to go absolutely nuts for them to pay that off. So that makes sense as a game environment play. Before we go down to kind of like the sub 6K stuff, because I think that's where probably the most interesting conversations are. What about some of the pocket passers that are a little more expensive? Burrow's probably a guy that ownership wise is just going to get squeezed at 7K. I'm guessing you don't have a ton of interest him versus the Steelers at this price.
Yeah, there's a lot of these that are like, because there's such interesting scenarios that could play out in these, right? I mean, the Bengals are one of these where you look at the implied team totals. It started out at 25.5 and then it's gone down to 25.25. But it's like, oh wow, it wouldn't like you wouldn't just pencil in the Bengals for 25 plus points, one of the highest implied team totals on the slate against the Steelers. But then it's like, but can't they get there with Burrow? The thing for me here is the Steelers, again, they've allowed 10 passing touchdowns, right? Maybe it's 9 passing touchdowns. Burrow gets his upside through passing touchdowns, right? These couple 5 touchdown games, a 4 touchdown game, and then some 3 touchdown games with like 300 plus yards. And so does Burrow come through and throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns in this matchup? Probably not, but he is capable of it. So this is one of those like large field bets for me. That's something that you build some rosters around Burrow having a big game, because if he does, then the Steelers get aggressive. That's what Arthur Smith does. That's what Russell Wilson does with downfield throws. So then all of a sudden, George Pickens has a shot at 12, 13 targets. He has a shot at 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, and it just becomes this blow-up type of game. Also with Joey Porter Jr. on Jamar Chase, like that elevates the chances of T. Higgins seeing more targets. And then obviously Chase Brown is just a super sharp play this week. So you have this spot where it's like you can get further down the line of like away from what people will see on the surface. And it's actually like the sharpest way to build, where it's like a Burrow, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, George Pickens bring back, becomes really interesting in large field play, but not something I'm pushing onto my tighter builds this week. Baker and Stroud are the 2 guys in this range that like, so Baker comes down to the Bryce Young factor. And I got duped last year by Zach Wilson. Wasn't it against the Chiefs where Zach Wilson had that great game?
Yes.
It's not a great statistical
primetime game. Yeah.
It was like, whoa, Zach Wilson looks like what Tony Romo thought he was going to be, And I told Rhamondre after that game, our COO at OWS, I was like, no, like Zach Wilson looked like a top 8 quarterback, like legitimately in that game. Well, Bryce Young, he came back from, his banishment to the bench. He had 3 games where he looked good for Bryce Young, and then he comes out against the Chiefs and looked like Zach Wilson last year. It was like, oh my gosh, Bryce Young's got it. Like Bryce Young's that dude. So, this can happen for one game, but also Bryce Young has looked better. He's throwing with anticipation. He's reading the defense. He has more confidence in the pocket. And we know that teams throw a lot against the Bucs. So if he keeps this game close, now I do think Bryce Young is interesting in large field play, but what I'm more interested in on like this conversation about, hey, who's the sharpest plays on the slate? Who are we really gravitating toward? If he keeps this game close, we've got Baker scored 27 plus DraftKings points 5 times this year. Aggressive Baker throwing the ball a lot against the Panthers becomes really interesting. So I think Baker is interesting. And then CJ Stroud, well, we'll save that for a little bit later. But yeah, there's interesting discussions to have around CJ Stroud and this Texans passing attack. But yeah, I think there's some interesting stuff in this mid-range for sure.
Look at you, just full of teases today. A single breast, a mention of talking about Stroud later in the show. What could that mean?
I'm all over.
Let's now head kind of sub 6K, right? Because there's a lot of names down here that I think look like decent, points per dollar values. You kind of touched on Herbert a little bit. Anthony Richardson's probably the main guy we have to talk about. 5,500. We've watched New England, get shredded in previous weeks by the Rams, by the Dolphins, but those are very different quarterbacks than Richardson. Now Richardson doesn't have Josh Downs in this game. What are your thoughts on Richardson, specifically if he does become the most popular quarterback on the slate?
I don't know that, and I think that, and the OWS community can certainly like fall into this trap, is like, you can overthink ownership and be like, well, this guy has a broad range. He's volatile and he's going to be chalky. Therefore, I automatically have to come off of him, right?
Mhm.
And I'm more likely than most OWS contributors to be like, this guy's volatile and chalky, and I'll still play him because I think he can post the best game on the slate. You know what I mean? Like I can differentiate in other spots. So Richardson falls into that bucket for me. Like I could see people being like, just don't play Richardson because he's volatile and people will gravitate toward him. Whereas for me, it's like, yeah, but he can score 35 points and nobody else can touch that. The interesting thing with him, like you alluded to, is I don't care about the matchup. Like the fact that the Patriots have been soft on defense literally doesn't matter in terms of Anthony Richardson's chances of having a good game, because it's not that the defenses mess him up. It's that he just misses throws all the time, like that are wide open. Like if you haven't watched Anthony Richardson play, it's shocking. Like you can't overstate the throws that he misses, you know? And so it's like, the NFL is not a game of big plays. The NFL is a game of sustaining drives and marching the field. And when he is consistently missing like layup throws underneath, that kills drives. So yeah, I mean, I think that this whole game is so interesting because if Anthony Richardson plays well in this one, the Patriots can't stop him. And then you have the Patriots shifting from like, hey, let's run the ball, let's play for the fourth quarter, to all of a sudden they switch over to, all right, let's let Drake May cook and see what happens. And then you have like a binary thing there where it's like, if Drake May is making mistakes and throwing interceptions against this Colts defense that basically just plays static and waits for the opponent to make mistakes, well, if Drake May is making mistakes, then it becomes a situation where the Colts can start to say, hey, we've got the lead, we're controlling this game, let's run the ball a little bit more. It takes the upside of Anthony Richardson off the table. But if Drake May is hitting these plays, this all of a sudden could develop into like a 31-28 type of game. Like this becomes a super interesting game. So yeah, I mean, there's no analysis you can get down to say this sets up this way, this and that and that. It's like, who knows, right? Either Anthony Richardson plays well in this one or he doesn't. And then either Drake May throws picks when he's attacking downfield or he doesn't, right? And that's really how this game develops. And so, yeah, I mean, this is kind of a microcosm of this week where it's like there's things to like, there's things to not like, and you kind of just have to pick a path and choose it. And then this is also one of those weeks where you say, look, what's going to make you money over time on this slate is probably not, I mean, it's going to be guessing correctly, right? But it's probably not going to be like, oh, I did all this extra research and found the best path. What's going to make you the most money over time on this slate is to guess correctly and then build sharp rosters around that guess. Because there's going to be plenty of people who play Anthony Richardson, but like aren't building clear and cohesive stories around that bet, right? And so it's like, you still want to pair him with somebody, either Michael Pittman, who's only 5.2K, or Adonai Mitchell at 3.9K. Technically, you go to Alec Pierce. We'll see if he practices today. He seems optimistic about playing. He's missed the last 2 days of practice. If he's out, then that's even better, right? For AD Mitchell and Josh Downs. You pair him with one of these guys, you have a bring back, maybe even have two bringbacks because the Patriots are cheap and you recognize you're going to have to be throwing the ball. And so, and treat it like a game that's going to have a lot of scoring in it. And then you tell a better story than other people are telling. And that's how you win, by guessing right on this spot. So I think that's important. I'll summarize that, bullet point that, but the way to win on this slate is you're going to have to guess. Cause like there's 8 or 9 games you could be like, this is a really interesting game. You're going to have to guess, and then just make sure you're building really clear, cohesive rosters around that bet so that you benefit if you get that bet correct.
Yep. I think that is always the name of the game here. It sounded like you didn't have maybe a ton of interest in the kind of the Darnold and Kyler stuff. Let me ask you about another name here who I think looks like a pretty good value, and that's Matthew Stafford against New Orleans. New Orleans hasn't been, that intimidating of a matchup. We get a dome game here. Thoughts on Stafford?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, the implied team total is a bit of a trap because of the fact that it's so hard to pass for touchdowns against the Saints. And so it's hard to see Stafford having a 4 touchdown game in this one against the Saints, but you can't totally write it off either. I mean, this is what I'm talking about, right? Like the spots I'm writing off are like, would it surprise if Minnesota and Arizona plays like 34-31? No. And that's one of the spots I'm like, I'll chop that one off, right? Like, would it surprise if Stafford throws for 3 or 4 touchdowns? No, they're implied for over 25 points. But just looking at that matchup, it's one of these where people could look at or projection systems could spit out Stafford because like, hey, implied team total and dome and all that. But realistically, like you don't score a lot of touchdowns through the air against the Saints. You're fighting an uphill battle to do that. So just having to choose some people to cut off my list. He's in that group that I'm cutting off my list and kind of betting on that matchup playing out the way that it's played out for teams throughout the year.
Before we move on, just want to give you the chance. Any other maybe off the board guys? You did a little bit about Bryce Young. I think I heard you mention Will Levis earlier. Anything else kind of down here in the super creative zone?
Yeah, I think, and so when we get to the player grid, you guys will be able to see my tiers on all these guys, because again, there's stuff to like on a lot of quarterbacks on this slate. So yeah, I like Will Levis this week. I like Bryce Young this week. Those are more large field guys for me. Will Levis, who, I described him, I think in the Angles podcast today, as like 80 to 85% of Josh Allen rookie year playmaking, but with like 0% of Josh Allen's ability to minimize mistakes. But it seems like they finally drilled into his head, like, you cannot be a meme anymore. You cannot be getting sacked and just flip the ball to a defender for a pick six, And so he's not making those plays. He's still making the plays. He threw a pick six last week where he just misread the defense, didn't see a defender. He's still making those plays, but he's not making just the, what are you doing types of plays as much right now. And, we see these scores recently, 19, 16, 18. He's capable of putting up a 25 to 27 pointer. Not to say that he's going to do it, but I think in large field play, he becomes very interesting. My large field pool of quarterbacks is going to be pretty big this week. And then I'll force myself to have a smaller group for tighter builds.
Before we move on to running back, I know at the top of the show, you mentioned some special Thanksgiving discounts over at 1 Week Season. Let people know what they can take advantage of today.
Yeah. So if you go to the site, you'll find the Thanksgiving stuff linked right at the top of the site, and all of there you go. It says Black Friday. You also find it linked throughout the content on the site, but and if you go to that page, it just has all the deals that we have. But yeah, it's 50% off all marketplace DFS education courses, $180 off of Inner Circle. It's $39 Bink Machine optimizer for the rest of the season. It's $78 for this season if you want Inner Circle plus the Bink Machine. So and then $5 props access for a week pass. Usually that's $35. You can get a $5 props pass for a week. So yeah, just lots of stuff to if you've been hanging out around the site, if you like our content and our way of thinking through things, but you haven't been sure if it's for you, or you don't play a big enough bankroll that you typically pay for a $200 subscription, good chance to get something really cheap, because next week the price goes back up to something that's more reasonable for rest of season. So yeah, we always do something fun for this week. All of this expires end of Monday. What's 12/2? Whatever 12/2 is, it expires into that day.
I think that yes, 12/2 is Monday. All right, let's head over here to the running back position here. We got some of our big names up at the top. Barkley with a stiff matchup, but just continues to find ways to put up monster scores. Joe Mixon coming off of a down game last week. Derrick Henry in that same game environment. Kamara, and then Breece Hall with the Q tag. That'll be an interesting domino to see what happens there. But thoughts on these high-end running backs this week? A lot of them not in that great a matchup.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, we kind of go across the board. There's not a lot. It's funny because I don't mind saving salary this week. There's plenty of tight end, it's either you're paying up for Trey McBride in a tough matchup, or Taysom Hill at probable ownership. Or you're getting down to those 4.3K guys. And then AD Mitchell is there. The Pats receivers are there. Gus Edwards is there. The Bucs running backs are there. There's a lot of places to save salary this week. And then, the cheap quarterbacks. But then it's who are we paying up for? Puka and Kupp are not in the best spot. These running backs are not in the best. Puka and Kupp are in a great spot for production, not for touchdowns. AJ Brown's not in the best spot for targets just because of the way his offense plays, or he's overpriced for his typical target expectation. So, and then you got these running backs who are not in great spots. So yeah, it's a very interesting week where I might have some rosters in large field where I'm let me spend 48.5K in salary just to do something really different, because that could theoretically be what wins tournaments this week. On tighter builds, I won't do that. But yeah, higher priced running backs. I think Saquon and Henry are both in this, Saquon in particular, in this bucket of you don't throw him out as an option, regardless of matchup, right? Likeliest outcome here is that he doesn't hit for a tournament winner at his price tag in this matchup. But I think you still consider him, and especially if you're building around that game, you've got Lamar stacks, and then you're well, this game is then high scoring, and let's think about Saquon Barkley in this. So I think that Saquon is in the mix, but he doesn't stand out on paper. Joe Mixon is, he's very touchdown dependent. So it's the same thesis as CJ Stroud. And I kind of talked through this in the Angles podcast, but it's like, in theory, you would think, okay, if Mac Jones plays, then the Texans control this game more, and therefore Mixon is the better play. But that's not really true, because you need Mixon to be scoring the 2 to 3 touchdowns, which means you need the Texans to continue to drive down the field. And then it's as likely that Stroud throws the touchdowns as Mixon runs them in. So both, the passing attack and the rushing attack in this game benefit more if Trevor Lawrence plays, but are also very interesting regardless, because I think the Texans can do well here. So Mixon, it's a broad range of outcomes, because he's not going to have these 70-yard runs that Saquon and Derrick Henry have, but he can get those touchdowns. And then Kamara, best matchup of the bunch. And then, you're just hoping for the big passing production that's kind of up and down for him. So ideally the Rams score. Because of the price tags on Rams players, you don't need to have a Rams bring back to tell that story. But ideally the Rams are scoring, and it's forcing the Saints to pass a little bit more, and Kamara gets really involved in that way. So yeah, Kamara is my favorite of the bunch up here on paper. And then Breece Hall is kind of like to me, a fear-based play of like, I'm scared that he puts up another 29 pointer, but like on paper, I can't point to it happening. So that kind of covers these top guys for me.
Let me ask you a quick question about Kamara as it pertains to Taysom Hill, because I think both of them are going to be popular. And you talk about, telling cohesive stories on lineups. In my head, their like super ceiling outcomes are pretty negatively correlated. Like we saw the 40-point Taysom. Does that track for you? Would you have those guys split on rosters, or would you ever think about using them together?
No, I can't think of a scenario, especially with Taysom's price up. I can't think of a scenario where I would play them together, because you're betting on the touchdowns flow. Well, I mean, with Kamara, you're betting on the pass game work, but his price is so high that you still need like a 2 touchdown game most of the time for him to really hit. And if he's putting up that, then you're not getting the Taysom touchdown. So to me, it's like an either. And that was what we loved about Taysom early on, was before people were on him, right? Was like not just that he's a strong individual play at low ownership, but also he's great leverage off a popular play in Kamara. So when that leverage goes away, or if you're playing them together, you're not leveraging this setup as the way that you should.
This next tier, I think, is where things get pretty interesting, as far as you could argue a lot of these guys are in better spots. They're a lot cheaper than some of those high-end guys. So, some names here: Bijan, Kyren, Ken Walker, Chuba, and then let's even lump in Chase Brown down here, who even saves more money off of those. What kind of jumps out in this second tier for you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Chase Brown's the only one from that group that I'm super. No, I won't say that. Kyren Williams is interesting. Like we talked about, he's not getting enough points through like the yards and catches, right? You got Puka and Cup. You're not going to throw the ball to Kyren Williams as much. I mean, it's just the nature of an NFL offense, right? We see back-to-back
usage is
0 targets
these past.
So, and then, he's not going to rush for 100 yards very often. So you're really betting on Kyren getting like the 2 to 3 touchdown game. And he typically needs that in order to put up that 30-pointer. And so that's kind of the issue there, is like the Rams can move the ball through the air with Cup and Nakua, and then you're hoping that Kyren gets the touchdown. So Kyren's in the mix, but he's the only guy from that list that I'm super interested in, outside of Chase Brown, who I think is one of the sharpest plays on the slate. I mean, he's averaging 27 touches per game across his last 3. The Steelers give up a lot more touchdowns on the ground than through the air, and the Bengals are implied for 25 plus points. And so you say, like, well, how do they get these touchdowns? Probably not through Burrow throwing 3 touchdown passes, but through Brown getting at least 1, possibly 2 of these. So yeah, I really like him at his price tag, because we see this pass game work, right? The floor is raised so much from this pass game work. And then, he's really the way that the Bengals are likeliest to score their touchdown. So Chase Brown at this price tag is really attractive to me.
It does look like Chuba is going to fetch some ownership. Any concern about Jonathan Brooks's role starting to increase in his second game back and make that maybe a more fragile play than people would want?
No, I mean, Chuba was ceding work to Miles Sanders all season. It kind of went overlooked because the Panthers were running the ball so much. So Chuba was still getting volume. To me, Chuba against Tampa isn't a place that I want to go, but I'm not concerned about the Jonathan Brooks effect.
Okay, good note there. What about getting a little bit more creative? You said that you don't mind saving money at the running back position. One spot I will call out that's going to be injury dependent are these Q tags for both Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. If they don't play, Jeremy McNichols is going to stand out. But what else down here in the cheap range do you like?
Yeah, are people, I haven't looked at ownership projections this week. Speaking of being behind, are people on Rachaad White and Bucky Irving this week? Or are we just pretending like this isn't happening?
It seems like a bit with Bucky.
Okay.
I'm seeing him as like the 6th, 7th most popular running back play, not Rashad though.
Okay. We used to play blue when Christian McCaffrey was on the Panthers and he was getting all the pass game work, all the carries, all the red zone work. We were paying 10.5K for him. He wasn't scoring 40 points a week. He was scoring most weeks 28 to 34 points, and every once in a while he would score 40. And it was like he was owned like 40% because it was just like, dude, if you can get 28 plus guaranteed points, do it, right? For that amount of salary. This is 4 out of 5 weeks that these guys have combined for 32 plus. 3 out of 5 weeks they've combined for 36 plus. They cost 11.1K in combined salary. Same thing we said last week on smaller field contests, 300 entries, 500 entries or fewer. It's super sharp to just play these guys together. And then as we said last week, the sharpest thing to do is recognize that the points probably won't be split down the middle. So you pick and choose between them. On the show, I think you asked like a lean on them, and I think I said Rachaad White on the show. And then by the time I got to the player grid, I'd moved that over to Bucky Irving. So Bucky Irving was kind of my lean last week, but it was like, you play these guys, right? Same thing this week. Nothing's changed. This week sets up better for Bucky Irving because they're kind of preferring him on the ground, even though they both had 12 carries last week. And they should be in control of this game. But both these guys are just super sharp plays. Smaller field contest. It's really sharp to play these guys together. And it's a unique situation where they're both just really low priced for, again, 11.1K getting you, you don't see this. You don't see 11K in salary getting you 33 to 46 points week in and week out. There's no place where you can combine two players that cost 11K and get 33 points as a minimum, as a floor per week, right? And so it's a very unique situation. I think it's one to take advantage of while it's there.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. I mentioned McNichols. I guess one other price tag that seems a little broken just because of, I believe when salaries came out, is Gus Edwards is only 4,300. Is that a potential avenue for salary saving at the position?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you compare him to the cheaper tight ends are better. When you compare him to the cheaper wide receivers, he's as good as or better than those players. I mean, really, you're comparing him to Booty and Bourne, who have kind of up and down targets, and they're relying on Drake May. You're comparing him to Adonai Mitchell, who has a really high ceiling but a low floor. And yeah, I mean, for 4.3K, the thing with Gus is we know he's not going to catch passes, right? Every once in a while, he'll catch one. So you're betting on yardage and touchdowns. He's probably not getting 100 yards. And so I haven't played him since Lamar Jackson's rookie year, which was, I believe, his rookie year, but it was at least the first year that he was getting usage. But that's because that year he was like sub 5K, and it was like, well, he's going to get touchdown opportunities, he's going to get yards, and every once in a while he'll get that 100-yard game. And then he went years being priced too high, still getting a little bit of ownership every week. And then last year he had was it last year or 2 years ago, whatever it was, he had like a couple big games out of nowhere, right? So he's capable of putting up the big games. He's capable of going for 100 yards. He's capable of scoring 2 touchdowns. What's likeliest is he gets you like 6, 7, 8 points before touchdowns. But J.K. Dobbins has 8 touchdowns on the year, right? Like there's a pretty good chance that he adds a touchdown to those 6, 7, 8 points. And even if he doesn't, if you compare that to like a 4.3K wide receiver, 6, 7, 8 points is pretty common, right? So I think Gus Edwards is a sharp play and changes your salary structure, especially if you're paying down at tight end, allows you to just a lot of salary flexibility. If you go something that Hilo talks about a lot, like typically when somebody pays down at one running back spot, they don't pay down at another. And so if you pay down for like Bucky Irving and Gus Edwards, now all of a sudden your entire roster construction is different from everybody else's because you have all the salary to play with. You're probably paying down at tight end this week as well. And so now you've got, 3 of these expensive wide receivers. If you're talking like 6.7K and above, maybe you're fitting in 4 of these guys. And so, yeah, there's just a lot that you can do that gives you a path to first place by playing Gus Edwards, on top of the fact that he can get you 15 to 20.
Any other running backs before we move on that you want to mention? I mean, some, Rhamondre, you got the Steelers running backs, Tony Pollard, anything else worth mentioning? Yeah,
Rhamondre is the one that I would highlight from that group, kind of in this mix where probably not winning you a tournament, but he's still underpriced for where pricing has been this year, right? Where he's very capable of getting you 17 to 24 in this matchup, assuming this game stays close, which it should. And most of the time this year when games have stayed close, he has produced for you. So If you think this game can play close, then Rhamondre becomes very interesting in this one.
All right, we are going to move on to wide receivers here. Appreciate all you guys hanging out in the chat today as we all knock off the Thanksgiving rust and get focused on the slate. If you guys are new around here, make sure you hit the subscribe button. JM and I are going to have a slightly different schedule for next week. I'm traveling, but I think the plan is it's going to be pre-recorded, but still air at the same time. So actually no change for you guys other than the fact that I will not be able to interact with you in the chat, but you guys will be able to watch this on live stream next Friday at 1 p.m. But yeah, let's move on.
Well, and no nursing mother next week either. So that'll be a different channel. Crowd pleaser's gone, but
can you what would your mother-in-law do if you had kind of like an art heist where you took that and took it back to your house and got rid of the 1 week season, teach you how to fish, and just replaced it with that? Do you think she'd notice?
She wouldn't think it was a funny joke. I think she's a big fan of this painting. So yeah, I don't think I would test it.
There you go. Yeah, don't test it. All right, let's talk wide receivers here. We've kind of hit on a few of these guys when talking about the game environment and their quarterbacks. We mentioned the Rams guys. You mentioned Joey Porter on Jamar Chase, the AJ Brown target issue. One guy we haven't mentioned is Justin Jefferson, just not happening for him this year. What at the top end interests you as far as these elite wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, AJ Brown is very interesting if you're betting on that game taking off, right? I don't think I want to pay that price tag and hope that he hits on 7-8 targets. But if you're saying Lamar has a huge game and it's hard to run against the Ravens, bringing back a Lamar roster with AJ Brown becomes very interesting. And if you're saving salary at running back, it's possible to do that, right? Or if you're saying AJ Brown's getting 11, 12, 13 targets because Jalen Hurts is throwing a bunch and having a big game, playing Brown and Hurts becomes very interesting. So really like AJ Brown and stacked around that game, but probably won't play him otherwise. Yeah, Justin Jefferson, it's a volume issue, right? Like, well, that was why it was so interesting for Addison to hit last week. Cause like, come on guys, you couldn't get Justin Jefferson there all season and then you're going to get Addison there. But yeah, I mean, with JJ, it's just that Minnesota's not trusting Sam Darnold to throw the ball enough. So there is still possibility that he hits on 8 or 9 targets, right? But I think he's hit double-digit targets once this year. And last year it was like 11 to 15 targets every single game. And that's I mean, he's still the most special wide receiver in the NFL. It's just the targets aren't there like they were last year. He's still putting up good scores, just not for his price tag. So yeah, up here, the guys who interest me are Puka and Cup, because again, that's how you're going to move the ball against the Saints. It's always a little bit iffy to just do like for like comparisons like this, but very similar style offense in the Falcons with Zach Robinson as the OC. Cousins threw for 306 against the Saints. It's just they could only score 17 points because the Falcons aren't good in the red zone. Saints are good in the red zone. But again, Stafford should be able to throw for yards here. It's hard to throw for touchdowns here. So what I like about Nakua, he's got an 18-pointer he's got in his 4 healthy games this year, 4 healthy non-kicked out of the game games this year. He's got a game where he scored 23 pre-touchdown points and 18 pre-touchdown points. So that's not what you want in his price tag, but that just illustrates to us that he can get you a really solid score even without the touchdown. And so touchdown is going to be harder to come by in this one, but he can score in this one, and put you on a nice pathway. And then Nico Collins is just really interesting to me this week. And again, I think let's just save that deeper discussion for the roster build. I guess we've already teased what the building block is at this point, but yeah, those are the kind of the guys up here who stand out the most to me. And then we get down to like Garrett Wilson, where you kind of say, similar to Breece Hall for me, fear-based, where really like Garrett Wilson needs 2 touchdowns to put up the score that you need. But it's like the Jets have been bad on offense, and yet in their last 5 games, Breece has scored 29 plus twice. Garrett Wilson has the 30-pointer. So it's possible, right? So he's a guy who all these Jets, I won't argue against them, but you're just kind of hoping to guess right in the right spot at the right time. And then Mike Evans, only 1 game all year over 7 targets, because his role doesn't change with Chris Godwin out, but that doesn't mean that there can't be. So in this week's Winner Circle podcast, I went through all the box scores from week 12 and just highlighted all the spots where, like, okay, last week in my DFS interpretations, Pete, I kept saying, would it surprise us if we looked up on Sunday night and Jalen Waddle had one of the best wide receiver games of the weekend? And it was like, I just kept spotting Jalen Waddle and being like, that just seems like DFS that would happen, right? And there was so much that happened like that last week where there was nothing in the research or logic that could point you to it, and it just happened, right? And or even Aaron Jones, right? He'd seen his role change, and Cam Akers is getting all this work, and then all of a sudden Aaron Jones gets all the work in, right? So Mike Evans is one of these where it's not going to surprise us if he gets 11 to 14 targets. His typical game is still going to be this 6, 7, 8 targets, but he could have a huge target game in this spot against Carolina. So Mike Evans becomes very interesting, and he can put up a nice score on 7 targets. You don't like paying that price tag for 7 targets, but yeah, that's kind of like wide receivers kind of thin this week, but those are some of the guys who stand out to me up here at like 6.7K and above.
Yeah, I guess the only other guy I would want to mention in this range would be T. Higgins. You mentioned that he could potentially see a target boost. Thoughts on him at 6,600?
Yeah, I mean, it's still like one of the worst matchups for wide receivers, but I think I prefer him in game stacks, but I wouldn't totally cross him off my list as a one-off. Same thing with George Pickens, honestly.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, George Pickens, just the epitome of a guy who's just like, you see it in that Thursday night snow game, like doesn't get there. That game underwhelms. And then the games where he really gets cooking, a lot of pieces are getting there. Thoughts on the Seattle guys? Obviously we have, JSN coming on strong. They're priced now within 100. DK Metcalf Q tag, but should be back. Is this just a matchup you kind of want to avoid against the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, there's enough question marks at wide receiver this week that this is like real. I don't know how helpful I am this week. This is really a week where I'm like, I'm not going to cross anything off of someone else's list for them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of this week is guesswork. And so what I can tell people is like where I'm leaning on my guesswork and why I'm leaning those directions. So yeah, I mean, I think that DK Metcalf and JSN hitting are long shots, but they're capable of hitting is how I'll paint that. So like, yeah, can they hit? Yeah. If I were playing them, I would want to really think through why I'm playing them on that roster. It would probably have to be a large field contest, and it would probably have to be a roster that did a lot of other things that was like betting on likelier to happen things, because you don't want to bet on unlikely things across the board, because then you get one unlikely thing right, but you don't benefit from it because you still have to hit on these other unlikely things. So yeah, that's one that you're not hitting that 20% of the time, the tournament winning score from those guys. You're getting it like 8% of the time in that matchup, 5% of the time, but they can still hit in that matchup.
I think there's some really interesting names in this 5K range. We did just get confirmation Josh Downs is out for this week. So I'll toss a few names out here that kind of stood out to me as far Brian Thomas Jr., Michael Pittman, maybe a little love for Mooney, maybe Tank Dell in that game. Anything in this sub 6K range you like?
Yeah, all those guys. I mean, I think all those guys are sharp plays. And this is where this week is weird, right? Because at cost, I like these guys. At cost, I don't like a lot of the expensive guys, but also the expensive guys will probably, some of them will outproduce these guys, right? Like in terms of raw points. And then if you have salary to play around with, you got to get up to those guys. But yeah, I think that Mooney, like on paper, nothing about him, but I do keep kind of spotting him this week. And I always pay attention when that happens, right? Like that was the Jalen Waddle thing last week, was I just kept being like, man, couldn't Waddle have a big game here? And a lot of times those things, it's like, it's just gone long enough on a player that you start noticing them, and it's like, this seems like the time to play them, right? And it just is the time to play them. So Mooney's not quite in that bucket for me, but I do keep noticing him this week. And it's like, yeah, Mooney seems like the guy who could hit here. Pittman, we're really obviously relying on he and Anthony Richardson connecting. But what's interesting is the last couple of weeks, right? Look at this, 11 catches on 15 targets since Anthony Richardson's come back. So even last week when Richardson couldn't do anything through the air, he was still connecting with Michael Pittman. So yeah, Pittman, this is an appropriate price tag for him at this point, like with his usage with Anthony Richardson, but he's a really good player at a pretty affordable price tag. And so he's certainly capable of producing at a nice level here. Tank Dell is probably farther down my list in a spot where I don't expect the Jags to be able to take away Nico Collins, but Tank Dell, another guy who can hit. I don't think I'm gravitating toward him except as like a trail bet on my Nico type stuff. And then there was one other guy in here who
Ridley?
Brian Thomas Jr. Yep. Brian Thomas Jr.
Brian Thomas. Yeah.
If Lawrence plays, that's I think a really sharp play this week because the prices come down. This is a guy who should be priced at like 6.5K with Lawrence playing. And now the prices come down because DraftKings has slashed prices and Mac Jones has been under center the last 2 weeks. So yeah, I like that play if Lawrence comes back.
Let's just do a couple quick plays under 5K. The one that I think is going to get a decent amount of love as far as like the pump play du jour is David Moore here on Carolina at 3,500. Had a really big game last week with 10 targets. You mentioned Bryce Young's play improving. Some other names down there, Noah Brown, kind of tried and true value option, and A.D. Mitchell, a guy you mentioned too, potentially being in play. Those three, any other names as far as value options that interest you?
Yeah, I mentioned the Patriots guys. I think they're interesting. And then there's like the typical cheap with upside guys like Calvin Austin, who broad range of outcomes, but now, he did it again off the main slate, of course, because I always have a little bit of Calvin Austin exposure every week, and then he hits when he's not on the main slate. But that's 3 games of 16 plus points. So that's one of those where this is the typical value at this point in the season where it's like, hey, this guy might score 4, but he might score 20 and nobody's going to be on him. He becomes less valuable in a week like this where there's like sharper value down here, right? Like an A.D. Mitchell and even a Kendrick Bourne and a Kayshon Boutte. Noah Brown, I'm probably not on him, but I wouldn't argue against him because of his role. And then, David Moore. So David Moore, don't like hearing that people will gravitate toward him because, there's like when a player has a game like that, sometimes everyone's like, oh, let's play him this next week. It's going to happen again. Other times people are like, oh no, I'll feel like a fish if I chase that, right? Like MVS, nobody chased that game the next week because they're like, nah, that's fluky. I'm not chasing that. He goes and puts up 16 again the next week. So David Moore, what I said in DFS interpretations was like, he's a sharp play because Jmtowin Sanders is out or supposed to be out. And that's been a big part of their downfield passing. And Jalen Coker is going to be out. And Adam Thielen's playing 60% of the snaps. So David Moore is going to be on the field. And he's a guy who Dave Canales obviously liked because Dave Canales brought him over from Seattle where he'd been with him before. And, Bryce Young meshed well with him last week. And David Moore, we've seen him do this throughout his career where it's like when he gets opportunities, there's guys like this, like Mac Hollins, David Moore, they're not going to command targets, but they're a really good like number 3 or 4 option that if they have to step in, they can play well on the outside. They're, big guys who can play well on the outside. So David Moore is a sharp play. Also, he's probably not catching 6 for 81 in a touchdown again, right? Like he's likely to catch like 5 for 40 or something like that, or 3 for 40, 3 for 50. He's a sharp play at cost. Like his likeliest outcome is sub 10 points, but I still like the play. You know what I mean?
Yep. All right, JM, the age-old question as we head over to tight end, although you kind of teased it before, as far as not much here. On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for this segment?
3.
A 3. Okay. You mentioned Trey McBride at the top, Taysom Hill. What a world. Taysom Hill at 5K here. I assume that's where the conversation starts and ends as far as like the high-end options this week.
Yeah. Pete, when my wife sees something, 2 products, and one is twice the price of the other, she's going to buy the one that's twice the price of the other because she thinks this is twice as good of a product, right? Like there's one of the interesting things about pricing psychology and DFS. Like we might see more people playing Taysom Hill now that he's 5K.
Yeah.
Than ever played him before. I won't play Taysom Hill this week because and part of that, okay, there's also pricing psychology of I was on him when he was 3.7K. I was on him when he was 3.6K. I was on him when he was 4K, and nobody was on him. And to me, that's the time to play him. But the role is still there, right? The reason that I was playing him when he hit for 16 points and 7 points, the reason that he was able to hit for 46 points, that role is still there, but his likeliest output in that role is 7 to 17 points. The reason why OWS has kind of been over the field on Taysom Hill for multiple years is because he's always way lower owned than he should be because it's unpredictable when he's going to hit, right? Obviously the role's a little bit bigger now because of the injuries, but why we've liked him for so long is he can go for 17 at a thin position at a cheap price tag with nobody on him. So his typical game is going to be 7 to 12 points and people are going to pay 5K for it. He has over the last, 5 or 6 years, whatever. He has a 27 pointer, a 37 pointer, and this 46 pointer. So the probabilities of that happening back-to-back week are really, really low. Much lower than ownership is likely to be. But yeah, people want to chase it, they can chase it because he's still a sharp play in a vacuum in terms of his ceiling. It's just the reasons why I typically play him are out the window this week. And then Trey McBride like is in a really tough matchup. So I think that people are they're going to want to spend salary here because it's like we're saving salary in other places. There's places to save salary and then tight end. A lot of people, that's like one of the last spots they get to on their roster. And then they're like, oh man, I got salary to work with. And there's no Kelsey and there's no Kittle. And, McBride has this red number next to him of like, oh, this is a tough matchup. And so, yeah, Taysom Hill, he's got a green number next to him. Let's play Taysom Hill, right? To me, I'm kind of looking in this like, I think Dallas Goedert, if Devontae Smith is out, Dallas Goedert in a game where the Eagles could throw the ball more, he becomes interesting. A lot of his biggest games in his career have come with Devontae Smith out. Hunter Henry is interesting because if nobody scores 30 to 40, if John Smith's not on the slate, Kelsey's not on the slate, if Taysom Hill doesn't score 46, then we go back to Hunter Henry's, 12 to 17 to 20 points actually being really valuable at that price tag. And there's somebody else down here who, I don't think Will Dissly's a bad play. I think Mark Andrews likely in games built or in rosters built around that game. But yeah, for me, it's mostly like Goddard and Henry. And then I actually think you can go down to Dalton Schultz, who he's kind of invisible at this point because he hasn't hit for big games. But now that his price, I don't think people realize like, oh, his price is 3.3K now, right? You see 0 touchdowns on the year. And so it's like 4 points, 8 points, 9 points, 5 points, 9 points. That's pretty good for a 3.3K player all of a sudden. And then if he adds the touchdown, now you're getting up to 14, 15 points. So I think Dalton Schultz, it becomes another guy who you don't need to save that salary there, but he's capable of putting up, 15 points at low ownership and a low price tag.
All right. I won't belabor the dire tight end situation any longer. Let's get to the good stuff. Building a lineup on DraftKings. We got our Deposit Kingdom weekly league here. I dropped the link in the Discord to this morning. We're behind schedule this week because we had a Thanksgiving edition of that. So we're going to have some ground to cover as far as getting this filled. Make sure you guys grab the link to enter that via the Deposit Kingdom Discord. As always, that link is in the description. You go to the announcements, you can grab that link there. JM, you teased it at the top like a woman's breast. You teased it. Who is going to be? I was going to add to that. And I was like, this is
nature.
Off.
This is biology.
Oh, I know.
You don't make it sexual. Come on, Dad.
Why is me saying women's breast sexual? I'm just talking anatomy here, JM. What are we doing with this block?
Yeah, we teased it. But let's talk about it. So it's going to be CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. And I also would have been happy to go something with the Bucs and Panthers game too. But CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. So here's what I think is interesting. So CJ Stroud taking a big step back this year, but it's interesting to talk about why he's taken a step back. And a lot of it has been protection and like how he's been under pressure. So most quarterbacks are bad under pressure. The issue for CJ Stroud, and he's taken a step back when he's kept clean as well, but like not as big of a step back. He's still a really good NFL quarterback when he's kept clean. But the issue for him has been not just that he's played poorly when he's under pressure, but that he's taken a lot of pressure. And this Texans offense is not set up for Stroud to have control and command at the line of scrimmage and make the protection calls himself. And so when teams are throwing confusing things at the Jags, I think that, offensive line play is not something that it doesn't pay off in fantasy, right? So people don't pay as close of attention to it, but so much of offensive line play is communication and understanding who has what assignment. So when a defense is throwing a blitz at you or they're throwing crazy stunts at you, the offensive line has to be able to know who's taking this guy, right? Just like a defensive secondary of like, okay, like we're switching. Now you're taking this guy, I'm taking this guy. And the Texans have been really bad at that this year. But now they're playing the Jags, who are 31st in pressure rate and dead last in blitz rate. Not even dead last. They are so far behind any other. They're blitzing 13% of the time. And like second fewest is like 18% of the time. And then everybody else is 20% or more, right? So like those pressure issues go out the window here. And so CJ Stroud's a guy who, like, I have preached against playing him because he had that huge game against the Bucs in a 37-39 shootout where he threw the ball 42 times, I think it was. And everybody's been chasing that ever since, right? And he was priced up over 7K. Well, all of a sudden he's down at 6.4K. He's playing the Jags, and Pete, CJ Stroud's second and third best fantasy games of his career have come in his last 2 games against the Jags. His only good game this year came against the Jags. He put up 33.9 against the Jags last year. He and Nico have combined for 60 plus in back-to-back games against the Jags. They cost 14.3K combined. So you get over 60 points. That's well over 4X, where you're rarely getting that in the NFL this year. So I prefer this if Trevor Lawrence plays, because then Trevor Lawrence, who was actually playing really well before he got hurt, then all of a sudden this becomes a spot where you expect him to have to stay aggressive. But even if Trevor Lawrence is out, I do think there's a chance that this becomes one of those Lions in week 11 type things where the Texans say, man, we got to get our season back on track. Let's get some rhythm going on offense. So I think that Stroud plus Nico Collins, I don't know how popular they will be because I haven't looked at that yet, but just in terms of the ceiling and likelihood of hitting, this is one of the highest likelihood bets on the slate. And yeah, I don't know how visible that is to the field.
Yeah, my just hunch is that people will be content to play Nico as a one-off and not want to deal with Stroud, right? That's kind of how the season has gone, right? Where like Nico gets there, and then every time you watch the Texans, we were talking about it on Ship Chasing on Wednesday night. I'm like, they're the team that makes me the most angry when I watch them are the Texans, right now. So if I feel that, I'm guessing the field feels that as well. All of the sacks, the passing game never really getting going. So I do think that will be a unique angle to actually stack it up. Where is the next angle or place you'd like to take this lineup?
So let's go ahead and assume that we've got Trevor Lawrence in this game. And let's throw Brian Thomas Jr. in, because if we're playing this stack, I definitely want Brian Thomas Jr. as the bring back if Trevor Lawrence is playing. He's way too cheap for Trevor Lawrence being on the field. So Brian Thomas Jr. as the bring back. And then I'll ask you, do we want to call this a large field roster? Do we want to call this a small field, like single entry roster? Because that dictates what we do at the running back position for me.
Yeah, I think, I like to focus a lot on the more, like small to medium field. Let's say, like the SPY, 4K entries, 5K entries, somewhere in that range.
Okay, so if we're talking 5K entries, then I don't want to pair. I actually wouldn't be totally averse to pairing the Bucs running backs, especially with something like this, because saying if Stroud and Nico get to 60 and the Bucs running backs get to 40 again, like that's your 100 points right there. And then you're just building ceiling off of that. But let's go ahead and just split these Bucs running backs up and give us a little bit more versatility in this roster. And we'll go with Bucky Irving in this one. Although again, I think that Rachaad White's probably a 40-60 underdog to have the bigger score between the two. But we'll go Bucky Irving in this one. And then let's do something different than the field is likely to do and go down to Gus Edwards. And this is what we're talking about with most people are not going to pay down at 2 running back spots. So you just materially change your lineup construction. This also, if we think that Herbert's going to be popular, then this is saying Gus Edwards is scoring the touchdowns instead of Herbert scoring the touchdowns, which obviously helps our rosters. It helps our pathways to a first place finish. And so, and then also gives us plenty of salary to work with. We can also swing over to defense, where Pete, I've been paying up lately because you've got the Vikings every week scoring double-digit points, and you've got somebody playing the Titans every week. Lots of opportunities for points, but this week I really like the Cardinals at 2.4K, and we can pull up the Cardinals recent games. This barbell Cardinals team, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, sometimes the Cardinals give up 30 plus points, but most of the time they're giving up 20 or fewer points. Like 7 games have given up 20 or fewer points, something like that. So we see these double-digit games recently at 8 points. And so against Sam Darnold, we've seen him taking sacks. We've seen him throwing interceptions. So I think the Cardinals are really interesting at 2.4K this week. And then that gives us, again, we're going to end up paying down to tight end. So it gives us quite a bit of salary to work with. Yeah.
Should we put Henry or Goedert on here and see where that?
Yeah, we can put one of them on there. And then if we decide we want the flexibility, it would make sense to throw Schultz. This would be the type of roster where it would make sense to throw Schultz, right? If we're like, ooh, an extra 1K in salary would be nice, then we can do that. So yeah, let's throw Hunter Henry on this one. And then see what we want to do from here. So we got 67.5K, which is kind of a weird range because we can't get up to what would be really cool on this roster, might push us over to Schultz, would be like a Mike Evans plus a Puka Nacua or something like that, right? Where we're getting 2 of these higher priced guys on a roster together, added in with Nico Collins, which would be a very unique roster build. Whereas if we do that, then we're kind of just like putting somebody in to put somebody in. So what if we go down to Dalton Schultz and everything
make it
fits
work?
Perfectly?
Yeah, and I think that too, like, obviously this is small field, when Stroud is hitting for a tournament winning score, sure. Could Nico have 102 and condenses all of the production, yes, I mean, he's that kind of talent. But if Stroud, is throwing for 300, or getting here, it's probably 303 TDs. That extra TD is going to someone else. And always just correlating that tight end at the cheap price there, I think makes a ton of sense. From your, I don't know how many lineups you've built this week. Does it kind of feel like more of a 3 wide or a 4 wide receiver versus 3 running back week to you?
Not necessarily, but when I play Gus Edwards, I want to trend more toward a 2 running back build, because otherwise I'm essentially betting on, like, once I get a running back in the flex, that's effectively playing Gus Edwards in the flex. So then I'm effectively playing Gus Edwards over Dallas Goedert, over Hunter Henry, over Adonai Mitchell. And I'm saying that he has to outscore all of those guys for this to be the optimal way to build, if that makes sense. So when I'm playing Gus Edwards, it kind of shifts my thinking to say, I don't actually want a running back in the flex, because now I'm placing a different bet. Now I might want to say, well, let me put AD Mitchell on here, right? Whereas what I'm really trying to do is create something different. So this is less about predicting what we think is going to happen and more about predicting what can get us to first place with players who are all capable of hitting, right? And so, that's kind of how I would think about that situation.
And it's fun too, like you said, because it does seem like people will gravitate to their salary relief, obviously tight end, because that's evergreen, but salary saving with the David Moores, or we'll see what else opens up there, as opposed to with Gus. And what we do, because there's such a high opportunity cost at wide receivers, we now have 4 guys who can drop 30 points. And if that happens, obviously you're in great shape, but also all of those other teams who are only getting 15 points from their punt play wide receiver, it's just a lot to overcome.
Yeah. And it's not just about the raw points, right? It's about the combination of raw points that, like, most of the people who you're competing against all the other people who got Nico Collins 30 points if he gets 30, but then most of those people are not getting the Stroud score. And then a lot of those people are probably getting the Brian Thomas Jr. score, but then most of those people are not getting, let's say that these are the 4 wide receivers who go for 30. Like, most people are not getting the Puka score with it or the Evans score with it. And so you're like shedding competition along the way by just having a unique roster construction. And that's one of the easiest ways to clear up paths to first place, is just thinking about this type of stuff, where it's like DFS becomes like, winning contests is typically less about properly predicting what's going to happen. It's about positioning yourself to win money when the players on the roster actually hit, right? And so this roster is, especially on a week like this, where lots of things stand out as like could hit, nothing really stands out as like, well, this is a way better play than anything else. And so this week becomes a lot more about how you put your roster together, so that if you get the players right, you're also maximizing your pathways to a first place finish.
Love it. All right, guys, that is going to do it for us today. Make sure you guys take advantage of those Black Friday deals over on the 1 week season site. If you go to the site, you'll see the drop down. You can click that page and it'll show you all of those deals. I'm going to be doing Off and On the Clock with the Badge Bros here in about 20 minutes. You can, fire us up alongside this weirdly timed Kansas City Chiefs and Raiders Black Friday game. And then I'll have my typical shows this weekend, DFS After Dark on Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, and then the Cram on Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Anything else for you, JM, here? Maybe just as you say it, put your head to the side so everyone can get one last look on the way out.
Yeah, I had to skip Moana 2 this morning, so 17 family members all went together without me.
Wow.
I skipped to do the podcast, so don't spoil it for me. Don't know what happened yet. No, nothing else on my end. We'll have all the content should be rolling out pretty much normal schedule as far as the scroll and whatnot. So if you're a subscriber, you'll find all of that coming in today. My player grid will come in today, and everything else will come out, throughout tonight, tomorrow. And we'll get ready for this weekend.
All right. Sammy is fired up. The Deem. Hit the like button on your way out. I'll see you guys over with the Badge Bros here in 20 minutes. For JM, I'm Pete. This has been the Block Party. We'll see you guys next time.